Good afternoon, all. Thank you so much for joining us today for WCMA's free member webinar focused on setting, measuring, and reporting on GHG goals and industry tools for dairy processors. I'm Grace Atherton, WCMA's Director of Communications, and we're thrilled to have you with us today to dive more into this hot topic in dairy processing today. Before we get started, I want to set a few housekeeping reminders out there. Please keep yourselves on mute and keep your cameras off to avoid interruptions and lags during our webinar. We will reserve time for questions at the end of our session today. So if you have questions arising as our presenters are speaking, please feel free to drop those in the chat at any time, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. If you have questions afterward, please also feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to help get those answered as well. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that we will be sending out a link to a recording of this webinar, along with slides and some helpful resources and contacts after this webinar concludes. So please make sure to watch for that in your email from me, and keep that in mind as we're going throughout. If you're taking notes or you think you missed something, don't worry, we'll send you information later on. First, I want to give a quick thank you to our two sponsors for today's webinar. Many thanks to Nelson Jameson and to Mead & Hunt for sponsoring today's session. We appreciate their generous support. And then I'm going to turn it over to WCMA's Director of Sustainability and Grants, Danica Nilsestuen, to take us into the start of today's program. Danica?
Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're really excited to be covering this topic as we continue our journey into covering sustainability topics at WCMA. So this afternoon, we will be covering an overview of the greenhouse gas reporting landscape, followed by an important update on the different tools offered by the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. And then we'll round out the discussion with additional greenhouse gas calculation tools. So we're going to kick off our discussion today by welcoming Liz Harder, Director of Sustainability from Harbor Environmental, who will talk to us first about the overview of greenhouse gas reporting.
Thank you. Let me make sure I'm sharing the correct screen. Oh, sorry. All right, do we have the correct screen up? I think so. Great. Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. Again, I'm Liz Harder. I'm the Director of Sustainability for Harbor Environmental and Safety. And the first thing I wanted to talk to you today about was greenhouse gas reporting in the context of ESG frameworks and standards. I'm sure a lot of these logos up on the slides are very familiar to many of you. But the thing I wanted to drive home today is that you can kind of check a lot of boxes when you calculate your greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with the greenhouse gas protocol. Let's see if we can get this laser pointer here to work. So we're going to kind of go through some of these different ESG frameworks and standards and talk about how they tell you to calculate your greenhouse gas emissions. The Sustainable Development Goals, these were created by the United Nations in 2015. They replaced the Millennial Development Goals. Some folks call them the global goals. These are 17 goals to be reached by 2030. And oftentimes companies with ESG metrics and robust programs select some SDGs that they think are material to their operations, and they report on their progress towards them. So SDG 13 is for climate action. So by tracking and reporting your greenhouse gas emissions, you can take important steps towards making progress on SDG 13. I really like this infographic. This looked at over 3,000 companies that were reporting their ESG progress on specific SDGs. And it shows that 72% of folks that are reporting on certain SDGs are reporting on SDG 8, which is economic growth and decent work. But the second most popular SDG that folks are reporting on is that SDG 13 on climate action, where they're reporting their greenhouse gas emissions and their targets. I'm sure many of you have heard of TCFD. This is where companies disclose to their climate-related financial risks to investors and lenders and insurers. This is made up of 11 recommended disclosures divided into 4 pillars. They have governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. So if you were going to be reporting on for the task force on climate-related financial disclosures for TCFD, how would you report your greenhouse gas emissions? Well, TCFD, this is straight from their recommendations, says that the greenhouse gas protocol methodology is still the most widely recognized and used international standard. So if you calculate your greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with the greenhouse gas protocol, you're also meeting the requirements for TCFD. GRI, I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with. This is the common standardized language for communicating ESG impacts. There's a bunch of different disclosures, and GRI is set up with different structures. They have universal standards that apply to everyone. They've got sector standards that apply to certain industries. And then they've got topic standards broken up into kind of 3 subcategories for the Section 200 series, which is about economic standards, and environmental standards for Section 300, and social standards for Section 400. If you were reporting in accordance with GRI, you might report on just certain topics that are material to your company. If you were to report on GRI 305, which is greenhouse gas emissions, for GRI, it specifically says that you're going to calculate and report your greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with the greenhouse gas protocol again. So you can see this recurring theme that when you calculate your greenhouse gas emissions, you need to do it in accordance with the greenhouse gas protocol, and you're checking all these other boxes for different ESG frameworks and landscapes. The Carbon Disclosure Project, well, formerly called the Carbon Disclosure Project, now they just call themselves CDP. I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with this. This is a voluntary reporting framework that companies use to disclose environmental information to their stakeholders. You get essentially a letter grade. You get an A, a B, a C, a letter grade to assess your company's performance. And the scoring incentivizes companies through disclosure and awareness, to management, and finally to be a leader in their industry. A lot of suppliers use these CDP scores to evaluate who they want to work with. And I really like this graphic over here on the right. You can see just the increase in folks that are disclosing year over year. And you can see in 2022, we had almost 20,000 companies that submitted a climate change CDP questionnaire. One thing that's kind of dated on this, you can see these are 3 different lines, one for climate, one for water, one for forestry. CDP has revamped their disclosure platform, and now they've rolled all of those into one questionnaire that covers forest, water, and climate. But if you were to submit a CDP report for your company and you needed to submit your greenhouse gas emissions, this is an expert straight from CDP, where it essentially says, use the greenhouse gas protocol standards. So again, you can see this theme that all of these frameworks and standards are aligning with greenhouse gas protocol. The Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, they have a set of standards to disclose financially material sustainability information by customers to their investors. TCFD, which we talked about earlier, is also a disclosure to investors, but that's really focused on essentially like climate risk. This covers like all ESG topics. And what they do is they look at, 17 different industries, and they have a materiality map that says what ESG topics are really material to that industry. So you can see an example over here on the right for oil and gas exploration, where they have greenhouse gas emissions as material to their operations. But I wanted to show you how that would look for you guys. You can see this is the SASB materiality map. It's probably very small on your screens, but the important thing to note here would be like the rows are different ESG metrics, like environment, social capital, human capital. You can see greenhouse gas emissions here at the top. So the rows represent different ESG metrics, and the columns represent different industry types. So we have financials and we have food and beverage over here. The dark lines are the ones that would be more material and you'd have to report on for your organization. So you can see greenhouse gas emissions is dark here for food and beverage. But if we were to look into the food and beverage industry, specifically for dairy, SASB says that you need to report your gross global scope 1 emissions in metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And they go further. They say that when you're going to report your scope 1 emissions, you're going to do it also in accordance with the greenhouse gas protocol. So you're reporting your greenhouse gas emissions, and now you want to have a greenhouse gas reduction target. you might be looking into a science-based target through the Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI. So science-based targets provide a clearly defined pathway for companies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help prevent the impacts of climate change and really future-proof business growth. Targets are considered science-based if they're in line with what the latest climate science deems necessary to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, which is limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Science-based targets used to allow a limit to 2 degrees Celsius, but that's no longer, in the latest climate science. We need to limit to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So if you were to sign up for an SBTI target, the first thing you kind of do a five-state process. The first thing you do is you commit by submitting a letter to SBTI and say you want to have a science-based target. Then you essentially have 2 years to develop that specific target and make sure it's in line with all of SBTI's criteria. Then you'd submit that target for validation with SBTI. Once it's validated, you kind of announce it to the world and to your stakeholders that you have this science-based target. And then you disclose, you report your progress annually. And the reporting mechanism might be a CDP disclosure. It might be an annual sustainability report, things like that. I'm not going to read you this whole slide, but how does SBTI relate to greenhouse gas protocol? Well, when you're looking at your greenhouse gas emissions, again, they reference the greenhouse gas protocol. So the take home here that I wanted to emphasize is that all of these ESG frameworks and standards all come back to the greenhouse gas protocol. It really is the gold standard for how you need to calculate your emissions. And there's a couple of great guidance documents they have. They have the corporate accounting and reporting standard. They have the scope 2 guidance and scope 3's guidance. These are just a couple. But I'm sure we've all seen this graphic where we have greenhouse gas emissions broken up into 3 main scopes. Our scope 1 direct emissions, right, where we might have natural gas combustion at a processing facility or fleet usage for our company, fuel usage for our company fleet. And we have our scope 2 emissions, which is like indirect emissions from purchased energy, such as purchased electricity from the grid. And then we have our scope 3 indirect emissions from all of our upstream and downstream activities. This was developed by Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So if you've seen this figure and you want to know more about it, I highly encourage you to attend the summer workshop where we're going to be going in depth into how to calculate your greenhouse gas emissions, because it's all going to be in accordance with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and in accordance with the Innovation Center. So now I'm going to turn it over to Eric. He's going to talk about some of the resources that the Innovation Center has.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Appreciate that. Give me one moment to share my slides. And just verifying everyone can see those. Perfect. Thumbs up from Grace. All right. Excellent. Thank you so much for the introduction, Liz. I think that was a great overview of the greenhouse gas accounting landscape. And now I'm going to spend just a few minutes going through some of the tools and resources that the Innovation Center for US Dairy has developed for the industry specifically to measure and manage greenhouse gas emissions. So before I get into the nitty-gritty, I just want to take a few minutes to orient everyone to the Innovation Center, sort of what our remit is, what we do, and the stakeholders we work with to drive sustainability. So you'll see here that the Innovation Center for US Dairy was established in 2008 by America's dairy farmers through Dairy Management, Inc., which is the national checkoff program for US dairy farmers. And back in 2008, the farmers were very proactive and had a long-term vision that sustainability is really a pre-competitive issue. We need to be in lockstep on sustainability and social responsibility as an industry rather than trying to figure it out in silos, on a company by company level. So the Innovation Center really operates on this model. We convene the industry, everyone from the farmers to industry suppliers to cooperatives and processors to the big global CPG companies and everybody in between, the entire supply chain, to align US Dairy on pre-competitive priorities, advance an industry-wide sustainability and social responsibility platform, and again, speak with that unified voice to inspire belief in our product, in our great products, for a more sustainable future. And looking a little bit under the hood into how our strategy is informed at the Innovation Center, our overarching vision is a future where U.S. dairy unlocks transformative good for people and the planet. And you'll see here that our work is really bucketed into three main pillars: advancing well-being, regenerating the environment, and caring for our animals and communities. And relating this all back to the topic of discussion today, if we look at the middle pillar here on regenerate the environment, you'll see that in the red box there, achieving greenhouse gas neutrality is specifically called out as one of our long-term strategies at the national level for U.S. dairy. So greenhouse gas emissions are obviously a very material and very important topic and issue in our industry. And we, back in 2020, as an industry, came together and set a goal to achieve greenhouse gas neutrality by 2050, which is aligned with what the Science Based Targets Initiative methodology says that Liz covered a minute ago. So what I'm going to kind of get into now is relating everything that Liz covered back to dairy and the Innovation Center. And I think if I had to summarize Liz's first component of her presentation, we learned that all of these reporting frameworks and certifications like CDP, Science Based Targets Initiative, sustainability standards bodies like SASB and GRI, and even in the regulatory space now, we're seeing like the SEC, and in the EU, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and even here domestically, several states like California are now putting forward and signing into law legislation that requires companies to publicly disclose their greenhouse gas emissions footprint. All of these are pointing to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol as the go-to standard and methodology for measuring, managing, and reporting your greenhouse gas footprint. So several years ago, the Innovation Center worked with industry stakeholders to develop guidance documents specifically for scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions for U.S. dairy cooperatives and processors. This was a long process that took the span of several years, but we were really hand in glove working with the GHG protocol to make sure that these guidance documents were applicable, digestible, and easy to use for U.S. dairy cooperatives and processors. And you'll see here on the images on the right, the guidance is split into two distinct documents. The first one covers scope 1 and 2, and then the second one is dedicated to scope 3, because as you saw on Liz's slide a minute ago, scope 3 is really it's a beast. It's got so many different emission sources from up and downstream the value chain. I'll continue to talk about these resources going forward, but if you look at the bottom of the slide here, you can access these resources for free. They are not behind a paywall. We will not take down your email information and add you to an email list. You can just simply download the PDF at that URL at the bottom there. An important point to make about these two guidance documents, though, is that they are built on the GHG protocol. So GHG protocol has a process that they call built on GHG protocol, where industry-specific and sector-specific guidance documents can be submitted, and then GHG protocol's team of experts will review the sector-specific guidance and determine if it is in compliance or in alignment with their sector agnostic standards that Liz talked about a little bit ago. So we actually, back in 2019, worked with GHG Protocol to get this endorsement, this mark of approval, if you will, to signify to our industry and to other stakeholders using these guidance documents and measuring and disclosing your greenhouse gas footprint using these resources will show that you are doing it in accordance with the GHG Protocol standards. And we're really proud to say that these two documents were the first agricultural sector guidance documents to ever receive this prestigious mark of endorsement. Even better, the Scope 3 guidance document is aligned with the FARM Environmental Stewardship Program. So if you are implementing and participating in the FARM-ES program on your supplier dairy farms, or you source from a co-op that uses FARM-ES, then you are already very much in compliance and in alignment with the GHG protocol. The first, and in the dairy sector, the most significant category of Scope 3 emissions is Category 1, which is called purchased goods and services. So that is essentially all of the emissions from feeding the cows and producing the milk and sourcing the milk before it even gets into the four walls of your processing operation. So by using the FARM-ES program, you are then able to use the numbers that come out of that to report on your Scope 3 emissions. And now I'll just take a minute to briefly highlight the U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment. Some of you on the line may have heard of the U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment, or in fact may even be adopters already, if you see your logo up on the slide here. But the reason I bring up the Stewardship Commitment is because it is really our nationally aligned way that we demonstrate and document to customers, consumers, and other stakeholders that we are putting the proof behind the pudding. We're measuring and documenting and continuously improving on important sustainability topic areas like greenhouse gas emissions. And how do we do that? We built in consultation with Harbor and Liz's team, we built a processor stewardship reporting tool, or PSRT for short. And so when a company elects to become a stewardship commitment adopter, they are voluntarily pledging that they are going to use this tool to measure and report on their sustainability performance. And by doing so, they are using those guidance documents I mentioned ago and using another resource that we've developed at the Innovation Center called the Dairy Processor Handbook to credibly, consistently, and in a robust way disclose their greenhouse gas emissions. And so a beautiful thing about this PSRT tool is that it tracks Scope 1 and 2 emissions in compliance with this guidance document on Scope 1 and 2. So if you were to become a stewardship commitment adopting company and you're using this tool, you are already in compliance with GHG protocol, and you have the support of Harbor and the resources from the Innovation Center to at least begin your journey on developing your Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas inventory. The tool does not yet do Scope 3. As you can imagine, that is quite a significant lift. And every company's Scope 3 greenhouse gas footprint is going to look a little bit different. But for the most part, we are able to consistently measure and track Scope 1 and 2. And I have just one more slide here to share. This is a resource that was developed by the Innovation Center a few years ago called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Opportunities Guidance. Now, this resource is not so much focused on measuring and reporting your greenhouse gas emissions, but rather, once you have done so, this is a guide on how you can take strides in your operations and in your supply chain to lower and mitigate your greenhouse gas footprint. So it's got a ton of technical, in-depth information on technologies, strategies, ways you can work with your stakeholders to mitigate emission sources, as you can see in the top bucket there, inside the four walls of your operation. So it's got sections on all the topics you see listed there. And then the second part is really focused on the supply chain, both upstream and downstream, everything from packaging, collaborating with your suppliers, the waste streams that you can work to mitigate, and even working in carbon markets to try to offset some of your greenhouse gas emissions. If you're interested in reading these, again, they're up online for free at that link I shared earlier. And I'm sure Danica and Grace will send out the link as a follow-up to the webinar. But if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to chat with you further, or at the end of the webinar today. So with that, I believe I'm going to hand it back over to Liz to wrap us up.
All right, can you see my screen? Good, okay. All right, so now we're going to talk about some greenhouse gas tools and resources you can use to calculate your greenhouse gas emissions. As Eric mentioned, we've developed the PSRT, the Processor Stewardship Reporting Tool, and this is built on a software platform called Intellex. Intellex can collect, analyze, and report ESG data in real time online. It can handle an enormous amount of data and supporting documentation, things like that. Using this tool correctly, you can have essentially like an auditable greenhouse gas report that can pass like limited assurance and reasonable assurance audits on greenhouse gas reporting. So the tool that we have, it doesn't just track greenhouse gas emissions, it also tracks kind of everything in the stewardship commitment, from like resource recovery to things like social metrics as well. And again, as Eric covered, it does just at the moment for greenhouse gas only track scope 1 and scope 2. It does not track scope 3. Harbor's going to do an in-depth demonstration of this tool during the summer workshop, but we did want to kind of give you a sneak peek today on what this tool looks like. So now I want to walk you through a critical component of the stewardship tool. This is the energy and greenhouse gas data entry form. This is where companies gain precise control over tracking their emissions. Think of this as like a highly adaptable instrument. We don't believe in a one-size-fits-all approach. We customize this form to match exactly what you guys have, what your activity is on site. So for instance, if you're tracking diesel usage, you'd simply put in your diesel usage here, and the system's going to calculate your energy associated with that and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that. We ensure that the units of measure are compatible with your raw data. So for instance, if you have natural gas and you have a bill and it's showing you decatherms of natural gas energy, we will customize the form to show natural gas energy and have decatherms on the unit of measure. If you get your natural gas bill in MCF of natural gas volume, we will customize the bill to the form to ask you for that. And we also have a comprehensive library of different fuel types, from common ones like natural gas and propane to even things like coal and CNG. But essentially, during onboarding, we ask you what's relevant to each of your processing locations or to your company, and then we make sure that we turn on just the indicators that are relevant to that processing facility or that company. So in this example, if you just had diesel and you didn't want LNG wasn't applicable to your facility, you wouldn't see that. This form is sometimes pretty long, and at the bottom of the form, I'm just showing you a snapshot, but at the bottom of the form, you kind of see where the crucial result. Here we've got our total scope 1 emissions. We've got scope 2 emissions calculated using the market-based approach and also calculated using the location-based approach. This is where you kind of see the work where we have these robust calculations happening in the back end in accordance with the greenhouse gas protocol and in accordance with the scope 1 and scope 2 guidance that the Innovation Center has put together. Another key advantage of this form is the flexibility and the customizability. So you can have this form on a monthly and report this form on a monthly basis. You can report on a quarterly basis. You can report on an annual basis. You can also have this form to be at a site level if you have 10 different facilities, or you can have it just be a total company-wide roll-up. So you can really customize it to exactly the level of detail that you want when you're tracking your greenhouse gas emissions. And again, at the heart of this tool is that it's built on the greenhouse gas protocol, and that we also make sure that we're using the latest emission factors. So you can be sure that when these calculations are done in the back end, we're using like the latest EPA climate emission factor hub factors, and you can make sure that it's going to have the most current scientific data and pass the most regulatory standards. So let's dive into the heart of the reporting platform, the PSRT. This is the energy and greenhouse gas dashboard. This is where the power of consolidated data truly comes to life. This dashboard is designed to be a comprehensive company-wide view of your energy consumption and your greenhouse gas emissions. It's built to accommodate a diverse set of reporting needs from companies that are participating in the stewardship commitment, whether you are managing one facility or you have multiple locations, and whether you're reporting like monthly, quarterly, or annually. So that individual form that we just looked at, that's essentially like a snapshot of a specific data point. This dashboard, this is a dynamic, complete picture of your overall environmental performance as a company. So here you can see greenhouse gas and energy information in its entirety, broken down by things like broken down by year. You can see it broken down by scope. We can break it down across different facilities. We can look at your emissions in terms of like greenhouse gas intensity, like which is per kilogram of product produced, or energy consumption per kilogram of product produced. And this information isn't just for your own internal ESG tracking. You can generate an accurate and transparent data for annual sustainability reports. You can use this data to fill out customer surveys or due diligence requests. You can use this data to complete a CDP questionnaire. So this dashboard in reality is much longer and has a whole bunch of different views and charts. But for each of these charts, there's a download function. And if I was to click on that, you can essentially download the whatever figure it is into Excel or CSV, and then do your own analysis and reporting offline as well. So we understand that every company has like unique requirements, and so our team can build custom dashboards and custom reports to like meet your specific needs. But that's a quick overview of the PSRT. Another tool I wanted to share with you is EPA's simplified greenhouse gas emissions calculator. This is a free tool. It's designed for small to medium-sized organizations, and it's to estimate your greenhouse gas emissions for scope 1, scope 2, and some of scope 3. And there's no one important qualifier here is that the latest update is from September 2024, but there's no guarantee that EPA is going to necessarily maintain this tool. Here's a snapshot of it. This is essentially just a free Excel download. So you can go to EPA's website and download it. This is really meant for like individual and small organizations seeking to understand and estimate their greenhouse gas footprint. It's a really good first step if you haven't done greenhouse gas measurement so far. And it's really good for looking at a single location or a single reporting period. The calculator incorporates factors and common emission sources like electricity consumption and transportation and waste generation. Its structure is built around a series of straightforward input fields. Users enter their data like an electricity bill or miles driven, and then the calculator uses relevant emission factors for these inputs and calculates the greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. Very similar to what we have in the PSRT, but there are some drawbacks that I wanted to highlight. One thing is that like this is just looking at greenhouse gas emissions. It's not going to track any other ESG metrics, where like the PSRT is going to track your water, your waste, all that jazz as well to meet the stewardship commitment. Another thing is this is not really like an auditable greenhouse gas emissions tracking tool. There's no, you could have, for instance, multiple Excel versions of this that might conflict with each other with different inputs. It doesn't really allow for supporting documentation where you might, attach electricity bills or natural gas bills to prove that your inputs are correct. It's also harder to compare like between facilities or year-over-year changes because it's really just kind of a snapshot in time for one small site. And there's not really like any built-in error checking. For instance, in the PSRT, if you had, your last month's electricity bill and then you add a 0 on accident this month, it's going to show you that you have a 100% or a 10% or a massive increase in your emissions from in your input value from last year. Is going to throw an error for you, but here in this tool that doesn't happen. So there's a couple of drawbacks for it, but I would highly recommend it as a really good first step when trying to track and measure and report your greenhouse gas emissions. And it's also a really good sense check if you're using a different platform and you want to just spot check and make sure that it's in line and that it's making sense. So highly recommend you guys go to the EPA's website and download this simplified greenhouse gas emissions calculator. And the last tool or tools I wanted to highlight is the greenhouse gas protocols calculation tools. They have a bunch of different, it's also Excel files that you can download. They've got tools for cross-sector tools, they've got country-specific tools, and they have sector-specific tools. And then also for actual countries and cities that want to measure their emissions that wouldn't be applicable to you guys. Here's a snapshot of the stationary combustion calculator tool. You can see it's last updated August of 2024. This is just a snapshot in Excel, but usually with all the tools, they also have an associated guidance document that will walk you through how to use the tool as well. So this is another great place to go to if you're trying to calculate your greenhouse gas emissions. And just a summary of some of the resources. I've given you some links that I'm sure Grace and Danica will share with you for greenhouse gas protocol resources, also some of the Innovation Center's guidance documents that Eric spoke about. And the last thing I wanted to reference was EPA's Center for Corporate Climate Leadership. They're the folks that have the free calculator that we just talked about. They're also the ones that publish the Emission Factor Hub and have a lot of good information as well. Thank you. I'm gonna turn it back over to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Sorry, everybody, for my cold voice. So before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to kick it back over to my friend Eric, who was negligent in introducing himself to you all before he started speaking. Eric, do you want to tell the folks who in the heck you are?
Yeah, that would be important, wouldn't it? Thank you, Danica. I was even reminded before the presentation started to do it, and I still forgot. But yes, if you do not know me already, I'm Eric Hassel. I'm the VP of Sustainability Standards Measurement and Reporting at the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. I've been with the organization for about 6 years now, and really serving as a liaison with Harbor in partnership with our Intellects operation behind the stewardship commitment and that processor reporting tool that we spoke about. So I'm really working a lot with our industry co-ops and processors on measuring, managing, disclosing their environmental impact, which includes greenhouse gas emissions. So very nice to meet you all and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Okay, so we had a few questions. As you know, when we have everyone sign up for the webinar, we have the ability to submit questions ahead of time. And we definitely had a couple of those that were submitted. So I just want to say too, as we transition into Q&A, this is such an important topic for our industry and our members. When we conducted our survey about 1.5 years ago on issues that were important to our membership that we cover in sustainability, this was at the top a lot because our customers are asking us for this information, the greenhouse gas information. They're asking us for that information when we're filling out those questionnaires. So that's why we wanted to make sure we covered key tools on how to track this data. So with that, the first question, with the change in the administration, should we anticipate fewer requests for greenhouse gas data from our customers and buyers? I know that there's been a lot of concern about changes in
Sure.
How we're going to handle sustainability issues with this new administration. So Liz and Eric, any thoughts on this?
Sure, yeah, I can take a first stab and then happy to pass it over to you, Liz. I would say not necessarily. And the reason is because a lot of the larger global CPG companies that buy a lot of dairy and dairy products are going to continue to press forward on ESG disclosures and goal setting and targets. And in fact, a lot of them have now baked in sustainability progress and key milestones in greenhouse gas and climate related impact to their governance. So, tying it to C-suite compensation even. And then also from a global exports angle, I mentioned that CSRD legislation earlier in my presentation. A lot of the European countries and the EU collectively are setting regulations that require, measurement and disclosure of greenhouse gas information. And so if your organization sells to the EU or exports to the EU, or you sell to a company that exports to the EU, chances are they are going to come knocking on your door for greenhouse gas information.
Liz, any thoughts?
Yeah, to echo Eric, and it's not just California. There's also other states here in the states that are also doing their own greenhouse gas legislation. And I would say that there are a lot of companies and suppliers that are also driving this, where they've decided that you have to have greenhouse gas goals in order to even work with them and do business with them or be a preferred customer with them. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It was a message we got at the Innovation Center fall meeting for sure, was all of this is local. And so just because the federal administration might be making certain changes, a lot of these policies are definitely local. Okay, next question. Oh, kind of related. Will the EPA remove the greenhouse gas tool as a part of all the changes being made at the federal level? Will they be removing that from their website and remove access to that? Maybe we don't know. I don't know.
My recommendation is to go and download it. It's an Excel document, so it doesn't hurt to just kind of cover your bases and go ahead and have it on your desktop just in case. But I think there could be changes where maybe they no longer update it or support it. They could take it down. Another thing is, EPA publishes like the eGrid factors that we use for our Scope 2 emission factors. So who knows the timing on that, and if they will be coming out in January as usual, or if we might have a break in that. So to be seen. But I would say if you're interested in that tool, I would recommend you go to the website and download it and have it on your desktop.
Sure. Okay, next question. I think maybe we covered this one. Does the Intellects tool track Scope 3? No.
No, it does not. Yeah, we did cover this, but just to reiterate, it does not track Scope 3 emissions because that Intellects tool was built directly from the U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment metrics that are in that program. And Scope 3 is currently not included in the stewardship commitment because it's a very subjective component of greenhouse gas inventories. Every company is different. They have different sourcing and operations and supply chains. So, Scope 3 is really a different beast altogether, separate from Scope 1 and 2 emissions.
Okay, so any questions from the audience? You can feel free to unmute or type them into the chat for sure.
Hey, Danica.
Yeah, Michael, please.
Yeah, I was just wanting some further information on the Intellects software, about who created that software. Was that by Liz's company, or is that a different third party? Is it licensed? Is it purchased? Is it stored on the server? Or is it the data stored in the cloud kind of stuff? I mean, just maybe a little bit further description on the Intellects software, because I think it's really important and key. And by the way, great presentations from both of the speakers today. I forgot to start with that. Thank you very much. Very informative.
Yeah, so I think Eric and I can kind of tag team on this, but Intellects has been around for a long time. It's and it doesn't just track ESG stuff. It does things like safety as well. So it's been around for a really long time, but they have a module specifically for ESG tracking, and Harbor are a strategic partner with Intellects, and so we help essentially configure the existing software exactly to match the Innovation Center's requirements for the stewardship commitment. And also then when we onboard sites, we can further configure that so that it's just specific to what you as a company or your specific sites want to see.
Yeah, and I'll just build on that. Thanks, Liz. Back when the stewardship commitment was first launched in 2018, 2019, I want to say, we needed a tool that was not only effective at measuring and tracking all of these environmental and social metrics, but that had really strong security measures, and Intellex met those criteria. So the Innovation Center, being part of the National Dairy Checkoff, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. So we cannot, we were not in a position to manage all the company's individual data coming into the tool to maintain confidentiality and anonymity. We needed to partner with Harbor and use the encryption and data security features that are really strong in the Intellex platform to maintain that level of security.
Amazing. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions coming from the crew? All right. As always, though, you can shoot questions back over to myself or Grace, and we can make sure we get them over to Eric and Liz. And this is being recorded, and we'll send this out to everybody as well. I'd like to next just update everybody on the rest of our 2025 programming and sustainability. So as you all know, CheeseCon is coming up here in mid-April. We have 3 sessions actually covering sustainability topics. One just isn't here on the list, related to employee topics that I needed to add on, but Grace will add that into the follow-up email. Sorry about that. But we're going to be covering unpacking carbon footprints, a value chain approach to advancing dairy sustainability. Eric will be leading up part of that discussion. And then we'll be having a conversation on sustainable trade, exploring the nexus of sustainability and dairy exports, which will be a great discussion on how sustainability policies are impacting dairy exporting. And then a session that we've mentioned a couple of times here is our 2025 workshop, which will be covering measuring and benchmarking carbon. So that will be hopefully in the summer. We have yet to set an exact date, and we definitely have it planned. We've got our speakers lined up, but we need to land on a date. And so as soon as we get that scheduled, we'll get that information out to everybody ASAP. But essentially what that workshop will be covering are the 3 scopes of GHG emissions, the methods for establishing scopes 1, 2, and 3 baselines using GHG protocols, how to track and manage scope 3 emissions with a focus on dairy supply chain, as well as all the different practical tools such as Farm ES, and the different tools that we talked about today. Then in the fall, we plan on offering another edition of our dairy sustainability workshop, optimizing sustainability, the materiality assessment workshop, which is what we offered this past May. So we plan to offer that again this year, since it was so, we had a full class in 2024 and plan to offer it again in 2025. So if anybody has any questions about our 2025 programming, you can definitely check in with me or Grace, and we can get you more information. But as soon as we get our summer programming set in stone, I'll definitely send out an email to everybody so you can get signed up for that.
All right. Thank you so much, Danica. Thank you again to Eric and Liz for those wonderful presentations today. And thanks to all of you for coming and joining us for the past 50 minutes or so. It's been a great discussion with great information shared. I also want to do one last thank you to our sponsors for today's webinar, Nelson Jameson and Mead & Hunt. We really appreciate the support for ongoing learning and connection in dairy processing. I want to give one last reminder before we go that we will send out an email after this webinar with a link to the recording, slides, helpful resources, and contacts. So watch for that in your email inbox. And I'll put in a plug for our next free member webinar coming up in April. We'll cover dairy exporting, in particular, navigating economic cycles in a changing world. Tariffs are a hot topic right now. Global commerce is a hot topic right now, and we're excited to dive into that. April 24th at 1 p.m. You can register for that webinar right now at on our website, and I'll also send out a link in our follow-up email as well. Thank you again so much for joining us all. We hope you have a great afternoon, and we'll see you on our next webinar.